Bring a Trailer podcast.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Bring a Trailer podcast. Alex Porter coming to you from Bring a Trailer headquarters in San Francisco, joined today by Jim Moore, VP of OEM and Product Development at SEMA Garage, or at SEMA, I guess I should say, right, Jim? And you oversee SEMA Garage, is that right? I already butchered your title, even though we cleared it before I started recording.
No worries at all. It's not the easiest title in the world. It is a mouthful. I am the VP OEM and Product Development for SEMA, overseeing the SEMA Garage program. And I thank you, Alex, for bringing me on the show. It's a pleasure to be here.
Shout out to HUD, my colleague who kind of put this all together and was hanging out with you at the SEMA show a couple months ago. Is that right?
I randomly ran into HUD at the SEMA show, and HUD and I go back probably 15 to 20 years ago. We worked together in the automotive industry, greatest industry on earth. And at that time, I think my greatest memory of HUD was him wrangling his two Miatas. So it's he's always had an interesting car collection.
I love that. When I meet a lot of folks who knew HUD, it's always like, oh yeah, we go way back, and everyone's always got an interesting story.
Everybody's got a HUD story.
Yeah, totally. Well, he's a great guy, and I appreciate him putting us together. I want to dive into your background a little bit and find out how you got into cars. I agree it's the best industry in the world. But before we do that, before we started recording, I was mentioning that would really like for you to explain to me and to our listeners and to our community all the different SEMA entities. As I was telling you before we started recording, I think of SEMA as the trade show, and I think that's how most people do. But
Sure.
I know that there's actually a bunch of entities, including the one you oversee, SEMA Garage. So maybe you can lay out the whole broad organization for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Your perception of SEMA is, I think, consistent with a very broad group of people. And that is, they know us from obviously our most prominent element, which is the SEMA show in Vegas. In fact, many people just assume SEMA is based out of Vegas. And in fact, we are based out of Los Angeles. We kind of always look at California as a little kind of the epicenter of car culture in America, and certainly going back all the way to the 50s and the 60s when SEMA was really formed. Some of the most prominent companies you can think of, the Edelbrocks, the Iskandarians and such, those were our original members. And SEMA stands for Specialty Equipment Market Association. We are a business trade association. Our mission is really to help promote vibrancy within our automotive industry, help ensure that the many members that we have a pathway to grow their business, and our job really is representing them as our members, and we do that through our government relations efforts. We do that through our business development efforts, things like our trade shows. We have councils and networks that help promote education and training initiatives. We have research arms that do market research and help give market insights and intelligence. And my personal favorite, I'm a little bit biased, but we have the SEMA Garage. And the SEMA Garage is a really unique program in that the association has invested almost $25 million over the last 10 years in developing two advanced product development centers, one here in Los Angeles and one in Detroit. And those are really kind of the, development labs for our industry. They're designed to give our members the tools that they need to help develop products and ultimately get them to market faster. So I love it because it helps me keep my kind of finger on the pulse of what the coolest, newest, most innovative products are. And frankly, I also find it tremendously fulfilling to be able to work with our members and help them get those products to market faster. I could sit here and go all day on how we do that, but I would say kind of the big areas that we focus on are emissions compliance. And when you think about an automotive industry, especially in today's environment where so much is focused on emissions and climate-related initiatives, we are working hand in hand with regulators and state and federal agencies, EPA, CARB, California Air Resource Board, and our members. Because you have to remember, any product that ultimately touches the emissions functionality of a vehicle, the burden is on that manufacturer to prove that that product doesn't take the vehicle out of emissions compliance. Every state is different. Here in California, as you know, Alex, we have smog checks, and every 2 years, your car has to go into a smog check. And if you're going to bolt a turbo or bolt intercoolers or even an air intake on your car, you've got to be able to prove to the state during that smog check that that product is approved. And we actually help our members kind of go through that really challenging process of testing and submission of all the paperwork and negotiating with the agencies to help them get what we refer to as a CARB EO, which is an executive order. And that is, for lack of a better term, kind of a get out of jail for free card. It allows them to sell their products in any state, California especially, and ultimately prove to both the regulators and that customer that that product has been tested, not to take the vehicle out of emissions compliance. That's a huge, huge problem for our industry, because if they sell products that are outside of emissions compliance, they're on the hook for a significant fine. Some of these fines can exceed, $20,000 per product sold. So, that puts an opportunity for a regulator to physically regulate a business out of business
Totally.
through penalty if need be. So that's probably one of our single biggest initiatives that we have with the SEMA Garage. But we also focus on rapid product development initiatives. We help our members gain access to OEM CAD information. We have a vast library of 3D scan data on vehicles so that they can help digitally design their products to fit. And probably one of the biggest kind of emerging initiatives is our ADAS compliance programs. And that is understanding how bolting products onto cars, such as bumpers onto trucks, can impact the functionality of ADAS, advanced driver assistance systems, the functionality of things like automatic emergency braking, lane keeping, cross traffic warning, and all those types of initiatives. So that was a mouthful. I probably
That's a lot.
downloaded
No,
way too much on you, but that is just kind of the tip of the spear of a lot of the types of things that we're working on.
Man, so I could spend the next hour talking to you about California bar stickers and CARB compliance. This is an issue that we and our users and our buyers and sellers are not only constantly, I shouldn't say battling, but like thinking about and worrying about, because California is kind of the hub of car culture and people are buying and selling here all the time, even if they're not located here. If you like collector cars, you're going to end up dealing with cars from California. But because it's so labyrinthine, it's so confusing. There's, it's not exactly, I have a Porsche from 1976, which is like the worst in the world. It's supposed to pass emissions, right? So
one year in.
I know. Anyway, so I want to dive into all that, but to go back to the origin stories of SEMA, I made the mistake that you pointed out and assumed you were in Las Vegas when you first jumped on the call. So I'm one of those who doesn't understand SEMA's history. So how far back does the organization go? It predates, I assumed the trade show is what started it, but that seems like it's not true. I mean, if you're talking about Iskandarian and Edelbrock, you're going back to the 50s.
67 was the birth of the SEMA show. And the SEMA show is really kind of where it all started. In fact, there's a fantastic painting that hangs.
Was it always in Vegas, or was it somewhere else to start with?
Nope. It started out here in Los Angeles. In fact, it started out under the bleachers of Dodger Stadium in 1967.
Oh, I love that.
So it ran for a few short years here in Los Angeles, and then it transferred to Las Vegas. And I think that's really where we really started rolling. That's where we gained a lot of momentum, and it is kind of morphed into the show that you know today.
And when it was in California in those early days, was it aftermarket parts? I mean, is it hot rod speed equipment kind of back then when it's under the bleachers at Dodger Stadium?
It really was. I've heard a story. I'll give you a 60% sure that this story is correct, but that early on with Revel models, we all know these little models, and back in the 60s when they started doing these, Revel models, I think, started using some logos and putting logos on these model cars, and some of the aftermarket companies that were out there starting to get pretty well known in the space realized, like, wait a minute, you're using our logos and putting our logos on these cars. We should kind of get together and figure out how to create a business association so that we can start helping to manage our licensing and our trademarks. And that really kind of became, I think, the origin of, well, okay, now if a couple of our companies have come together to create this association, let's start a trade show or a business meeting. And, you see that just grow into this massive $330 billion industry that you know today.
Crazy. That's really cool. Can you talk a little bit about the kind of evolution? I mean, I think now of the show of being these kind of extreme builds and like really wild kind of cutting edge, maybe not cutting edge. Well, no, there's probably cutting edge technology, but also just kind of like an aftermarket show car display, right? Like really wild stuff. How far can the aftermarket industry push things? Was that always the case, or did that evolve over the decades?
Well, I think like any car show, it probably started out as just, bring the best version of what you have.
Sure, sure,
And as our industry has continually evolved, our definition of what's the best you can bring has also continued to evolve.
sure,
And
sure.
I think it really highlights the vibrancy and the innovative spirit that exists within the entire SEMA community. You go back 20, 30, 40 years, and what may have been high tech was, the way that you jetted a carburetor. Um,
Totally.
and,
Yeah.
and how long the header tubes were and how those tubes came together. And those are still things that absolutely are continuing to evolve. But now we layer on fuel injection. Now we layer on, computerization and digitalization, all these new technologies. And it seems like every time one of these new technologies comes down, the pike, everybody gets nervous about, oh, is this the end of our industry? And in reality, one of the things that I think is the best success story of our industry is looking at to see how our industry has continued to learn and innovate and find new ways to exploit these technologies. And so, you come to a show today, you still have those traditional hot rods, but you also have full EV vehicles. You have aftermarket hybridization of vehicles. You have, at our SEMA show this year alone, we had hydrogen internal combustion engines. We were exploring renewable biofuels and talking about how things like ethanol are not only renewable as a biofuel, but they actually have the potential to unlock greater levels of performance in vehicles. So, when you look at what's happening in our industry right now with the new technology that is really redefining the entire landscape, I personally see it as an amazingly exciting opportunity for our industry to really catapult ahead in new ways as they innovate. In fact, it's kind of the basis of, I think, who SEMA is. We are pro innovation.
Yeah.
We love technology. We are technology neutral, and it's one of the reasons why I think for some of your listeners, they may look at SEMA and say, "Oh, you guys are these hot rod guys. You're all about engines." And I'm reading that you're against EVs. We're not against EVs. We love EVs. Do we think EVs should be mandated by the government? No. Do we think that we should give the market the opportunity to continue to evolve and innovate and find new pathways to become more efficient? Yes. And I think that that's really kind of the spirit of who we are as an association and a community.
Yeah. I mean, you sound very bullish on the future of the automotive industry and on the future of kind of automotive enthusiasm. And this has kind of become a refrain. I talk to a lot of our guests. We end up somehow on this topic because I think there's a lot of fear mongering about it. And I'm like you, I'm optimistic. I'm bullish. I think the history of cars and the automotive industry in general, but also aftermarket stuff and modifications and hot rodding has always been evolving. There's always fears that, oh, this is the end, and I just don't share those fears. I'm like you. I think that people are enthusiastic in this space and they're exploring new things, which might be a little uncomfortable for folks, but there's still a tremendous amount of enthusiasm and innovation.
There's an analogy that I love. And you talk about, am I bullish about the future with all these new technologies? The answer is absolutely yes. I would say go back to like 1940. And what was a guitar? A guitar was this acoustic instrument that you could sit up on stage and you could pluck your strings. And tell me, was that the end of the guitar when the electric guitar came on the scene in the 1950s?
Some people were probably worried it was, right?
It is certainly because it's a new technology. But in reality, the electric guitar didn't replace the acoustic guitar. It expanded the definition of what a guitar was into an entirely new genre. It birthed an entirely new level of music. There's still people that are incredibly passionate about acoustic guitars. There's people that have developed an entirely new sound of music with electric guitars. And I think like internal combustion engines and EVs have a very similar kind of storyline where I think an EV is just going to help continually redefine our definition of what a car is and can be. And I think it will open up an entirely new genre of accessorization, customization, and
Totally.
personalization for our members.
Yeah, that's already happening, right? I mean, it's
Yep,
happening right now. It's already, it's like,
absolutely.
it's almost like it's too late. Like Pandora's box is open. I mean, electric cars existed 100
Yeah.
years ago too, right? Like, so it's not even really a new technology. When are we going to bring back steam cars? That's the big question, I guess, Jim.
Give it time. All good technology comes around.
Totally. Totally. So if you don't mind, I don't want to get too wonkish and bore people, but I would love to dig a little deeper into what you guys do in terms of working with companies on making sure that they're up to emission standards. Is that,
Sure.
you mentioned it's mostly California focused? Maybe you could just paint for me
Sure.
just kind of a broad situation about where smog testing even exists. I mean, it's primarily California, right? So I think
Yeah.
Washington State has eliminated it. It didn't exist in a lot of states. So this is primarily a California function?
It is. So if we take a step back and look at what the history is, a lot of people are kind of familiar with the air quality crisis of California back in the early 70s. California's unique geography, where you have the greater Los Angeles basin surrounded by mountains, a huge port, a lot of cars, a lot of traffic, it would tend to collect a lot of the smog in the area. And so California was early in understanding the need to help regulate emissions, and they created the Air Resource Board, which is what we kind of know today as the California Air Resource Board.
Yeah, CARB.
Well, CARB, exactly. And following that, a couple of years later, we had the Clean Air Act, which is a congressional act, and then we had the federal agency of the EPA that was created. So because CARB existed before the EPA, but the EPA is a federal agency that still has jurisdiction over CARB, there became a quote unquote waiver program. So EPA exists, but it allows CARB to create its own rules in California and gives them an annual waiver to be able to do that. California sets higher emission standards than the other 49 states. So what happens is if you want to sell a product in the United States, in 50 states, you have to meet the higher standard of CARB. And if you can meet that CARB standard, then you can sell in any state. You can elect to not sell your products in California, but we all understand how big the California economy is.
The notorious 49 state cars, they used to call them, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So, and some of our members choose to do that. They choose to work through their program or work their products. They choose to create products that may only be allowable to sell in 49 states, excluding California. So that's where you kind of get this weird 49 state plus California relationship in a lot of our emissions regulation. And it creates a lot of challenges.
Sure. There's no doubt about it. I've had, oh boy, I could tell you a whole experience on buying the right catalytic converters for my old Acura NSX. Yeah, you can't get the cheapo ones. You got to pay for the real deal ones with the right part number on them.
You got it. And that is that EO number that they talk about.
Yeah, the EO number. Order. Yep. Absolutely. So presumably over the years, it was companies working on things that would directly impact the emissions systems, right? So exhaust systems, things like that, intake systems. But today it's probably all electronics, right? It's tunes, it's chips, it's that kind of stuff.
It is definitely expanded out. So you just have to remember that really anytime from the point at which air enters the engine, which is your air cleaner, all the way through the engine, all the way through the catalytic converters until it exits the catalytic converter, that is effectively a regulated process where you have to keep your emissions within a very, very tight box. And that's impacted by airflow, fuel flow, your engine management and engine control. So yeah, all of these different types of things. I mean, even changing, gearing in your transmission can ultimately in some ways impact it. So we have to pay attention to all these different parameters and really make sure that we're helping build the pathways for our members to be able to navigate their products through that compliance process.
Totally. And talk to me a little bit about how the SEMA garage facilities themselves, you said they're like an area for the partners to actually work on things. So there's people in there physically experimenting with products?
We've got a team of about 20 different people, lab technicians, mechanics, engineers that help work consultatively with our members to help them get through that process. So basically, a member can come to us with a product and say, what do I need to do with this product to get it legal? We can take that product and frankly, completely turnkey for them. We then assign that program to an engineer. That engineer will help create all the necessary administrative paperwork for
Yeah.
application purposes. We hand it off to our lab team. We run an EPA and CARB compliant emissions lab. We do diesel as well as gas for
Yeah,
emissions
which is
testing.
confusing and has its own set of rules
Yep.
for California with different years that cut off. 91 for a diesel, right? Instead of
Yep.
75. Yeah, that's what I
Yeah,
thought.
and with the new diesel particulate filters that are
Right.
coming out, so you've got catalytic converters on cars, you've got diesel particulate filters, and now with the advent of direct injection in gas engines, well, guess what? We're going to start getting gas particulate
Of
filters on
course.
cars, so
Of
that's in
course.
our future.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, we get to do we go through and actually test the vehicles in their stock form. We modify the vehicles. We do those same tests with the modified vehicles, compare the results, and the results have to be within a very tight percentage of each other. Once we've done that, we assemble all that data and submit it to the regulation, whether it be CARB. We work directly with CARB in their aftermarket department for their engineers. Submit all that, answer any questions that they have, and ultimately help pursue that CARB issues them that executive order.
And that relationship has got to be one of the most valuable parts. That is SEMA Garage's relationship with regulators, right? Because that's where the rubber meets the road, so to speak.
We value our relationship with CARB. It is we see it as both collaborative and in partnership. It's interesting. We don't agree necessarily with all of the regulation and initiatives that CARB has, but we have a deep level of respect for ultimately what they're trying to achieve. And I think that our overall working relationship is really positive. I mean, it has to be.
Of course.
At the end of the day, we're in this together. We're collaborating to build a better pathway.
Totally. And does that same kind of relationship or same kind of process apply when you're working on something for the EPA too? Or is this essentially once you've met California standards, that's what matters because then everything else follows in its wake?
Yeah, I think your question is really kind of enforcement. And CARB enforces differently than EPA, whereas CARB proactively looks at the results and has to approve the results before they issue you the allowance to sell the product. EPA sets the standards, but the burden is really on the manufacturer to say that your product meets those standards.
Gotcha.
And in the end, you can sell, but if they audit that and test that and find out that you, in fact, do not meet the standards, then you have big problems.
That's Dieselgate. That's like Volkswagen.
A little bit, yeah.
Okay.
And that's actually one of the initiatives that SEMA has. We have an in-house program called SEMA Certification, where we actually test products as an independent third party for our members, give them that test report so that they can go sell their product. And should their products ever be recalled or audited, all they have to do is slide that and say, I did all of my testing. It met all the things. We're good.
And it probably gives a manufacturer a peace of mind too, to know that there's not some inadvertent issue with their, that's great.
Absolutely. Yep. And I think it also is meaningful that our members can say when they're marketing their products and advertising their products that these are emissions compliant.
Totally. It makes them feel good, makes the customers feel good. I've certainly bought a few products that I wish had been more thoroughly vetted. Can you talk a little bit about, again, we're talking about how things have evolved. And I think HUD mentioned that you guys also work on kind of unlocking access for organizations to OEM software. Is that part of what you do, right? Which is an interesting line of questioning.
So when you think about SEMA as an organization, there's about 7,000 members, member companies at SEMA. 3,500, give or take a few, are actual manufacturers. These are companies that make products. Every single product that's made for a car, if you imagine the car is the canvas, your product is the paint, they have to go together. Right. And when we think about like everybody who is, bought accessories for their car, has probably had that horrible experience where they get the product and it just does not fit. And it's frustrating and they have to make the decision, do I return it or do I try to make it fit? And at the end of the day, that doesn't help anybody. It creates problems for the manufacturers because now the manufacturers are like, people are putting stuff on our cars that doesn't work, and now they're blaming us because it doesn't
Sure.
work, and so it may create warranty issues. Who knows? So SEMA actually works directly with a number of OEMs to help gain access to their original CAD data, and these are the factory blueprints for these vehicles. We actually archive these in a library and then work with selected members that are approved. We know who's getting the data. We know where the data is going. We know, when they're getting it. And we actually allow access to that data so that if a company is going to create a new air intake for an engine, they can actually start building off of the factory blueprint file, the factory CAD file
Yeah.
for that engine. And it creates near perfect OEM level fitments. And
Yeah.
everybody wins with that. The consumer who's buying the product, they have a high level of trust that that product's going to fit. The OEMs know when you bolt something on my car, it will enhance it. It, in theory, if done through this process, will be a significantly higher quality product.
Yeah.
And, it's not lost on the OEMs that the enthusiast community is a great advertising tool.
100%.
You know what? I mean, if you've got a bunch of people showing pictures of their car and showing what their car can do, Ford will sell more Mustangs.
Totally.
If there's a lot of Mustangs flying around.
It's why everyone's in Southern California, to your point. I mean, it's the hub of car culture of the earth, right? Regardless of whether you like carb standards, you got to be there if you want to be part of car culture.
It's a great place to be if you love cars.
Totally. I see sketches behind you that this is an audio only format, but they look art center-ish, or like they were done by, car design students, a lot of whom passed through Southern California.
You got it. The Art Center of Design in Pasadena.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So I'm, as you're speaking here, Jim, I'm blown away by the depth of knowledge you have and the kind of articulate way that you're able to explain everything, which is hugely appreciated. What's your background? Do you come from a car family? Did you pick this bug up on your own? How does this all start for you?
I am probably a consummate car guy. I'm a product of, I like to say I'm a product of Detroit, even though I grew up in Northern Ohio. I grew up in Toledo, Jeep plant, go Jeep.
Yeah. You haven't completely kicked the accent. I hate to tell you also. You've got Midwestern charm up and down, Jim.
Just don't let me go back to Ohio with a California accent. No, it's, I never wanted to do anything else. I mean, from my earliest memory, I just knew I was going to be working in and around cars. It's always been my number one passion. Starting out all the way back into high school, I was reading Car and Driver magazine, and I noticed on the masthead that it was based out of Ann Arbor. And it was just like, oh, well, I guess I'm going to go figure out how to work Car and Driver magazine. And that's kind of where, I would say it probably started. I had the privilege of working with some amazing people. Detroit is not a bad place to be if you love cars. Got surrounded by some amazing product, and that fuels your passion. Working with great people, being around great products, it just helps you fall in love with it more and more. And from there, I got into the racing side. I used to work at Ford Motor Company and their Ford Racing division, and got exposed to a whole host of great personalities in that world.
What era was that? What kind of stuff were you working on?
So that was back in the late 90s, early 2000s, post-CART IRL split.
Okay.
We did a lot on the CART side. We were working John Force and NHRA, Colin McRae in World Rally, Dale Jarrett and Rusty Wallace in the NASCAR world. I'm trying to think who else we had. Jackie Stewart in the Formula One team. So
amazing.
We had
not a bad list of names and teams to be associated with. That must have been very exciting.
Being able to go to work every day and have an opportunity to work with some of those personalities and do it through the perspective of a manufacturer was a real privilege.
Yeah, and you were on what? You were on the product side of things. You were on biz dev side of things. I know you've worn a lot of hats.
Yeah, mostly on the marketing side, where we worked heavily on kind of understanding and tying the brand into those initiatives and promoting Ford's overall racing efforts. Gotcha.
And you were back to high school, a hands-on guy too, right? Working on your own cars.
There has always been a car in the garage. It's funny. I grew up and there was 2 black exhaust marks on the inside of our garage door where my dad would tell us that was when I got our 38 Jaguar SS100 finally started the first start, and it blasted a big
Oh man, SS100 in the
Oh
family?
yeah,
Wow.
38 SS100. I don't remember it. I don't remember it.
Oh, you never got to drive it?
I never got that one. Was gone long
Oh,
before I
bummer.
was born. But
Oh,
the only lasting memory I have of the Jaguar era was the 66 XKE, which is a whole story into itself.
oh, amazing. You were also at Ford when it was Ford Jaguar, right? Isn't that era?
It was just at the end of that. I think there was a
Okay.
gentleman by the name of Neil Ressler at Ford at the time who was overseeing the Premier Automotive Group. I think that went into the 2000s.
Yeah.
But yeah, they brought together Jaguar, Ford, Volvo, Lincoln, all under one roof.
Yes, that's right. There was the Lincoln. Gosh, I can't remember what it was called now, but it was a real pretty Lincoln sedan from the late 90s that was also a Jaguar S-Type. They were like the same car underneath, and they were both
Oh, I
really well
vaguely
reviewed.
remember
I
that.
remember that.
Yep.
Could it have been the Lincoln LS? Oh God, somebody's screaming at
Well, there
their.
was LS, but I don't think that was the one that was Jag.
Okay.
That was its own vehicle. I definitely remember the
You know
LS.
the one
That
I'm
was,
talking about, right? They were
yeah,
really well reviewed, probably by Car and Driver. I'm sure Car and Driver liked them as well.
could have been, could have been.
And then how far back do you go with SEMA, Jim?
So it's interesting. I was with SEMA around 2014 to 2017, right after the SEMA Garage was started, and I helped oversee their OEM relations efforts. I left for a few years, and then about 7 months ago, I ran into Mike Spagnola, the CEO of SEMA, in an airport lounge at LAX at 6 in the morning, and one thing led to another, and the next thing I know, I'm back at SEMA and loving life.
That's great. That was a random encounter.
Well, it was random for me. Apparently, he tells me he was already thinking about this. So it was just fortuitous for him. I guess
Yeah,
it was fortuitous for both of us.
it was kismet. That's
Yes.
wonderful. So a couple things I wanted to hit you up on before we part ways because they were so interesting to me. HUD mentioned a rat rod MGB. Can that be right? Is that a real thing that's happening, Jim?
So an MGB would be entirely too large. This is an MG midget.
Oh, it's okay. Gotcha.
So my brother and I have an unhealthy fascination with what we refer to as crap cans. And
Yes,
that
right.
is,
Okay, I was saving that term. That was another
yes,
term that you used. Yeah.
yes,
You said
it is.
my absolute favorite thing is crap cans. That's what you said.
Absolute favorite things is crap cans. And he's back in Ohio, and he has the privilege of having a relatively decent sized shop and the ability to store cars. But I'm in California, where I have the benefit of being able to find cars
Sure.
that still exist. So, as every good car person does, where you're constantly trolling every available online resource up to and including Bring a Trailer, always looking for ways to spend your money. We just randomly come across these, sub $3,000-$4,000 cars that you're just like, that just needs to be in the collection. So we've got I say we. He's got most of them. I've got one or two of them. But there is a 66 MG midget with no windshield, Brooklyn windscreens, completely stripped down. I think it's got electrical conduit for an exhaust pipe. Still runs. There's a 65 Beetle that I think has every single accessory from the J.C. Whitney catalog thrown at it.
Does it have the Venetian blind things on the window?
It does have the Venetian blinds on it, as well as the front windshield that tilts out.
Heck
the air conditioning is the front windshield that tilts out.
Oh yes, absolutely. I bet you don't have. I bet you don't have wheel spats on the back though. 65 is too late for wheel spats, right?
No wheel spats, but he does. He does have a Sharpie marker on it for every time it dies. It gets a hash mark on the side of it with a dead bug. So
yeah. Like bombing runs. I love it.
Yes, that's classic. There's an 87 Jag XJS V12 because everybody needs like a $2,000 V12 in the garage.
Man, you guys inherited the British car bug from your dad. It sounds like, right?
It's so odd because for a kid that grew up outside of Detroit, I did not fall in love with American cars until much later in life. It was all about the foreign cars growing up.
Yeah.
And I would say it wasn't until college that I discovered like, oh yeah, all roads do lead to LS.
Totally. But British cars mainly or German cars too? I mean, you mentioned a Beetle, but mainly British cars, British roadsters?
Yeah, it was. So my dad was always into Jaguars. That was always his passion. But then later in life transitioned to Mercedes diesels, which is the antithesis of exciting vehicles.
Well, except I don't know. Be careful, man, because on BAT, these W123 diesels, people pay a fortune for them.
They do. They are not fast. They are not
No.
exciting, but people are willing to pay a fortune for them.
Well, their style, they're not exactly my cup of tea. I used to work on them
Yeah.
back in the day. And even 20 years ago, we used to see examples that had 3, 4, 500,000
Oh,
miles. So that's
yeah.
one of the things. And they're also pretty stylish. And they're one of those cars that's, a compromise between, this is just my kind of guess. They're a compromise between vintage. They have a vintage look and kind of a classic stateliness to them. If you can deal with the lack of performance, they're quite usable even for a modern driver.
They are quintessentially classic and reliable.
Yep, totally.
Yeah,
totally. With some style.
Yes, with some style. No, I do have a soft spot in my heart for Mercedes diesels. I'm of the opinion that a 87 126 300 SDL Mercedes is probably the finest vehicle ever manufactured in the history of the world.
I'm totally with you. Just give me my 126 with a gasoline engine, please.
Just go.
Give me the gas motor, but that chassis, incredible.
Yeah.
Do your brother and you kind of exchange these cars? Do they make the trip back and forth from Ohio to California, or is it a permanent fixed set in each location?
I keep trying to talk him into sending a couple of those out, but he just hasn't taken up the offer yet. But I'll continue to work.
You'd think that a Roadster with Brooklyn screens, that's got California written all over it. I mean, this doesn't seem like Ohio is the right place for that.
I will say it is a fun car to drive, but I think the novelty of driving that cross country would wear off within the first 2 miles.
You also mentioned when we were corresponding a couple of weeks ago, 80s muscle cars, which is interesting to me because you normally think of muscle cars as being earlier than that. Is that like Fox body Mustangs? Is that what you mean? Fox body Mustangs and Camaros? What's your, is this part of your kind of conversion into American cars?
I think so. And it is what I love about classic cars is classic cars are directly related to the demographic that's buying those cars.
Totally.
And it's like, I am a product of the 80s, and the cars that were aspirational for me in the 80s that I remember like were the cool cars to have. They are right now. Those are the cars that are just really coming on. And it's like, as much as everybody loved to hate the Fox body Mustangs, they were always cool. They were always fun. And then they were just nothing for so many years. And I was just recently at our PRI show. SEMA owns PRI, and that is a partnership where it's actually the SEMA PRI organization. And I was shocked. I think I counted 12 different Fox body Mustang builds on the show floor.
Oh yeah, they're back, baby. For sure.
I mean, they are back with a vengeance. I would say go buy as many Fox bodies as you can in any condition.
People are buying them on Bring a Trailer. I mean, like some of the Saleen cars and the Cobras and Cobra Rs. I mean, you can spend pretty damn close to 6 figures on one of those right now.
I just saw that Roadster Shop just launched a chassis for Fox body Mustangs.
Totally.
When Roadster Shop has arrived making chassis, that car is in it for the long run.
Yeah, I've always had a soft spot for the SVO Mustangs. I had a turbo coupe. You remember those? They had like a Merkur engine in a T-Bird in the late 80s.
So I used to own a Merkur, and when I worked at Ford, we worked with SVT. At that time, there was a gentleman by the name of John Coletti, who ran the SVT team. We used to work with him. And they had that 2.3 liter turbo. Yep.
Yes, indeed.
SVO Mustang. I think they made that for 1 or 2 years.
So there's I could really go deep on this, Jim. There's an older one that's like a McLaren build, ASC McLaren, that's a non-intercooled 4-cylinder. But then later they have the engine that was in your Merkur. That's the Pinto 2.3 single overhead cam with a turbo and an intercooler, top mount intercooler. They put it in the Mustang for 3 or 4 years. That's the one I want. It's got the asymmetrical hood scoop. But as a teenager, I had the T-Bird version of that car, which is a slightly heavier, larger car. But I loved it. It had the dual, snout intakes on top, and they put rack and pinion steering in it, and bigger wheels and bigger brakes. They are meant to be a little bit European in nature, and the Merkur especially, right? You ever missed that car?
Mine was an automatic, so I don't miss it as much as I probably should.
Yeah, totally.
But in classic car guy form, I always had the manual transmission sitting in the corner of the garage that you bought the newspaper ads.
Totally.
Just never got around to the install. Totally. But it was a fun car. It was a very fun car.
What do you find yourself looking at these days? What's on the either on the shopping list or just the interest list? What are you fantasizing about these days?
There's, I can't get enough of old trucks, old farm
Mhm.
trucks. I'm always looking at old farm trucks. I really, really would love to find like an old Ford Highboy 4x4. My daily,
You missed
I'm
the
a,
boat on those too, Jim. I
oh,
hate to tell
I
you.
know, I know. I'm too late to the game. I'm too late to
Yeah,
the game. My daily is still my one true love in life. I got a 1997 Land Cruiser that's just about to roll over 300,000 miles. Um,
amazing.
I love the 80 series Land Cruiser.
Totally. You and
And that,
everyone else. You didn't
yep,
miss the boat on that one.
I did not. I got on the boat right when the boat left the harbor, which is good.
Fantastic. Before we end, I'd be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about Bring a Trailer's partnership with
Sure.
SEMA. We've done quite a few charity auctions for a number of different kind of SEMA causes.
Yeah.
Up top, I asked you to kind of break down all the different organizations within SEMA that kind of have SEMA names, and one of them is SEMA Cares, which is kind of the charitable wing. Is that right, of SEMA?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's really important, and one of the real kind of pillars of SEMA as an association is helping our membership, helping our community. And one of the ways that we do that is through our charitable contributions, charitable support. So, SEMA Cares, which benefits a lot of children's charities, underprivileged children, and kids in need. We work to help kind of coordinate some of these builds, working with our members, helping work with other media properties, and ultimately even auction houses such as yourself and some of the other, that are out there in the industry. So what we're doing out there to help try to, one, build awareness for the ways that our community can kind of come together and help generate money to support these causes, but also help just get people engaged, helping our
Getting
members
the
get engaged. Yeah.
and getting the youth engaged too. We were talking off mic a little bit about kind of prepping the next generation and about the enthusiasm that's coming up. One of the things we've done is we've auctioned a number of these builds that are done by high school auto shop
Yeah.
classes in conjunction with SEMA, and then we'll auction them on BAT. And that's such an important initiative, obviously, both supporting the few auto shops that remain, which are so great. I was an auto shop kid, but also, I think you said this, Jim, training the next generation of mechanics, right? We need those folks out there.
It is a huge priority for SEMA to help really foster and develop the next generation of mechanics, technicians, and ultimately just people that are going to carry this industry forward, helping get people involved early through programs like their high school shop classes, through other initiatives that even through our racing efforts on PRI, just getting youth involved and engaged is always a priority for us.
Absolutely. It's vital. And it's another reason that I'm optimistic. There's
Yeah.
a lot of kids out there who love putting these Jeeps together. It was Jeeps and Forerunners, as I recall.
Yep.
And they did an amazing work and were super enthusiastic and really took me back to when I was a teenage kid working on all my cars. So anyway, working on that Turbo T-Bird, which did have
Yep.
plenty of problems, as I recall. Awesome, Jim. Well, thanks for doing this. Any parting shots? Anything else we missed? Anything else we should chat about before we close out?
I think we did a pretty good job. We covered a lot of ground. I mean, this is a conversation I think could certainly go on all day
Oh
long. But
man. Yeah, we didn't talk enough about black boxes and carb
as-
regulations, I don't
oh,
think.
we'll save that for round two.
Totally.
No, just what I would say is, a lot of people think of SEMA purely as being focused on the business side of the community, and whereas that is where we have always been. We do understand that there's an opportunity for a broader audience, even at the consumer level, to kind of get involved. And so I would encourage anybody out there, if SEMA is something that you're interested in, SEMA is something that you want to help kind of become a part of, visit SEMA.org. There's ways for people to get involved through our SEMA Plus, become more involved in the advocacy efforts and our grassroots efforts, through other companies that make products out there that may be just looking for a better support. If you're not a part of SEMA, look us up, give us a call, talk to us. We're here to ultimately help grow the community. So check us out. Call us if you have any questions.
And come to the dang show. I've meant to do it for like 10 years and I've never done it, Jim. So I got to get out there. Next time, maybe
Uh,
you and I could walk around instead of HUD. We'll let HUD stay at home and you and I can cruise the floor. How does that sound?
you can come as my personal guest. In fact, we've got a show coming up November 4th through the 7th, 2025. So there you go. Put it on your calendar and let's make it happen.
Count on me being there, man. Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it, Jim.
It was my pleasure. Thanks so much, Alex.
And thanks to you all out there for listening. As always, we'd love to hear your questions, concerns, feedback. You can reach us through podcast@bringatrailer.com, and we'll catch you next time.